folks, welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. Got a good show coming up today. Got a couple of guests here for you, and going to get into that in just a few moments. In fact, we're starting a series of interviews that we did at American Freedom Alliance. It was a day-long event last Sunday where we had Charlie Kirk, David Horowitz, Bill Whittle, Brent Bozell, Rebecca Friedrichs, Michael Walsh, and we're going to combine them into a few different episodes here for you. But as Howard Beale, network movie for your younger kids, you definitely want to check out Stream Network. Howard Beale said, the news anchorman, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm serious. I'm furious. I am absolutely stunned at the events that took place within 24 hours of the American Freedom Alliance. American Freedom Alliance is an organization that is geared towards protecting the tenets of Western civilization. We talk about culture, we talk about science, we talk about multiculturalism, we talk about the economy, we talk about free speech. And with over 20 guests on Sunday at the American Freedom Alliance conference, with over 200 attendees from students all the way to senior citizens, all wanting to understand our culture a little bit better with this seemingly leftist Marxist takeover of our speech and what we can and cannot say, and the people being banned on our neighborhood square today, the town square, which is, whether you like it or not, our social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. People are being kicked off because they have an opinion which does not jibe with the folks in Silicon Valley. And within 24 hours of the American Freedom Alliance organization's incredible day-long event, the president and my good friend, Karen Sigmund, was fired from her teaching profession, something she's been doing for decades, going back to colleges, including Dartmouth, I think. She's in a private school in Los Angeles, California. And within 24 hours of the AFA event, she was notified that her contract will not be renewed. She asked why. What was given to her in writing was that her public opinions, the opinions that she has made public views, I think was the word. Folks, this is beyond scary. And I wrote an article carried across a lot of different platforms. It was up at ricochet.com. Check out our social media for the links on that. But this is in light of what just took place with social media banning a whole number of different folks, most of them on the right. They even called the one guy, the extreme leftist, Louis Farrakhan, on the right initially as well. And, you know, they got rid of these folks because they believe that their opinions should not be heard in the public town square. We are facing right now something which is, we've been talking about for years, but we're now reaching the pinnacle of this, listen, I don't care. You know, we talk about this battle cry from the right. We talk about it, and I wrote about this. We talk about a slippery slope. I don't care about Alex Jones. I don't like Alex Jones. Do I protect his right to have a platform, even though I disagree with what he is saying? Yes. I don't like Louis Farrakhan. I don't like the fact that he refers to Jews as termites, which means he's referring to the Jews needing to be wiped out, to be extinguished, to be genocide. I don't want his voice out there, but do I support his right to have a voice? Yes, because that's what called freedom of speech is. I believe in you. I believe in the individual to determine for themselves whether they should like or dislike somebody, not to a few hundred employees in the social media confines of Silicon Valley. This is the leftist authoritarianism that we've been talking about for years. We've got Michael Walsh coming up. He's written a couple of books on this, The Devil's Pleasure Palace. and Fiery Angel. And he puts this all back to the Frankfurt School, where they have taken over our institutions. So now we're seeing the results of that. It is no longer a level playing field in the marketplace of ideas. The idea of somebody controlling your speech and your discourse because they disagree with you, no matter whether you're in school or in pop culture and entertainment or in sports or in corporations. The tech titans own it all. And this isn't about free speech. This is about control. Do not think for a minute it is about anything other than control. Yeah, I'm furious. I'm upset. I'm scared. You know, Scott Adams posted something. Great guy. He has his own podcast. And he says, he's calling the Facebook purges, the Twitter bans, Reddit and Google suspended searches a second coup attempt. In example, after the Russian hoax, tech companies don't want to be blamed for real Donald Trump winning in 2020 and are shutting free speech down. That's exactly what it is. We've talked about this before. They're clearing the brush for 2020. They do not want any voices of dissension that in their mind can sway votes. It is up to them to have the mouthpiece, to be on top of the mountain, to have the one voice. And that is, we must defeat this president. And it isn't just about social media. They're now going after your jobs. If you are in any way a vocal advocate for free speech, for free markets, to get out there and to discuss what we have discussions for on our show about, you can lose your job. And Karen Sigmund did. A teacher, a math teacher, whose students were in tears when she announced to her class that she will not be returning in the fall. Tears. They absolutely loved her. Did she mix her philosophy and discussions that she's had at AFA in her school? Never. She doesn't speak about politics. I wish all teachers would be like Karen. And they fired her because apparently somebody saw the event coming up, saw the agenda talking about free speech, talking about academia and how the left has taken over it. Talking about science, talking about unions and teachers. Discussions that we should be having in an open forum, in the marketplace of ideas. This is where we sit down and have a discussion, not being hit over the head with somebody's opinion. And if you disagree with them, you are now a racist, xenophobic bigot. Yeah, I'm furious. Karen's a good friend of mine. I'm sorry. And I worked with her this weekend, and I've worked with her in other AFA events, and that whole circle of people are absolutely stunned. And that is exactly what it is that they want to achieve. They want us to be stunned into silence. And we're not going to put up with it. They want us to be silent until January the 22nd, 2021, when hopefully they can put in their newly anointed Democratic new president. And then they can go after the Trump family and put them in jail. And don't think for a moment there aren't people out there talking about this. So I'm sorry, I am upset. I'm emotional because I am angry. So this series of interviews that we have coming up here were filmed all before this took place. So hopefully you'll enjoy the interviews. And leave some comments if you're watching this on YouTube below. What do you think about what's going on? And we'll give you some updates down the road as far as what's happening with Karen. Dave Sussman here at Whiskey Politics, America's Voice News. Find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes. Please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes if you're listening. And the Ricochet Audio Network. We'll be right back. Man, Dave Sussman back with you at American Freedom Alliance, and delighted to have with us Rebecca Friedrichs, who has her book, and it is Standing Up to Goliath. Fascinating story, Rebecca. Tell us a little bit about the union situation that you were facing, and you were just sharing with me a little bit as well for our guests.
Sure. So I was an elementary school teacher for 28 years here in Southern California. And from day one, in fact, from the time I was a student teacher, I watched as teachers would abuse little kids and the union would protect them. I would try to fight against negative policies that were literally destroying our schools and my profession. And no matter what I tried to do that was right for children, that was right for teachers, I always ran headlong into the union I was forced to fund. All teachers have been forced to fund unions as a condition of employment for about 50 years.
So this has obviously been a long time coming. Teachers don't have any say whatsoever, no matter your political party as a teacher. You could be right or left, and you have to fund. And what happens with that money through the unions?
Yes, well, this is what's interesting. And by the way, I want your viewers to know, I even served as a union leader in my local association on the executive board, trying to change things from the inside, because most teachers just want to teach, just want to love on the kids and do a good job. But our money is taken from us, and it's used to fund the far left agenda in this country.
Right.
And when you look inside my book, I have some tables where I show where the money's going. Almost all of it goes to Democrats, far left Democrats that believe in abortion and all sorts of things that most teachers disagree with, but we were forced to fund it.
Now, we were talking right before the camera started rolling, and I asked you point blank, I said, does this anything to do with Janice? This happened before Janice. You said precipitated Janice. So
we're the trailblazers.
You are the trailblazers for Janice, which now prohibits unions from requiring member dues to what exactly?
That's right. So in the past, you didn't have to be a member of the union and you didn't have to pay dues, but you had to accept their representation and pay them fees. And the difference between dues and fees could be $50 a year, $100 a year. It was nothing. And you couldn't vote in collective bargaining or anything. You paid for it but couldn't vote, didn't have a voice. So our case, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, which was the trailblazer for Janice, argued that all government employees should be able to decide for ourselves without fear or coercion whether or not to fund unions. And our case was poised to win 5-4 after oral arguments in January 2016, but Justice Scalia died 1 month after our case was heard. So we lost that vote, ended up with a tie. Janice came in behind us, and on June 27th, 2018, Janice won. And now all government employees who are unionized are free to pay unions nothing.
So how has that impacted the unions today?
Well, it hasn't impacted them enough yet. It's impacted them some, and they're very upset about it. But the reason it hasn't impacted them enough is kind of threefold. Number one, they immediately raised the dues. So those who opted out, now they just raise the dues on everybody else, and then they bully you. You're a free rider because of you, we're raising the dues on everybody else. So the bullying has always been there, but it's gotten worse. So when you opt out, you truly are isolated and bullied, and the unions have taught other employees, particularly teachers, to bully each other. And it's really tragic because these teachers aren't typically people who would bully, but they're believing lies. They're believing that when you opt out, somehow you're bringing harm, but you're not. You're exercising your liberty, and maybe you have discovered that the unions are spending all your money on politics, and you don't want to do that. Most teachers are unaware. Second thing the unions did was, during our case, they came up with something called the Friedrichs fix. And that fix was a whole lineup of bills that they brought to any blue state, particularly here in California, basically undermining the freedoms that they knew employees were going to win through Friedrichs and Janice. For example, one of those fixes was they wanted a new law that every single employee who's in a union shop has to meet with the union for 30 minutes during company time on the taxpayer dime and hear all about how great the union is, and no one else has that benefit. No other outside organizations, only the union. That's now law in California.
Wow.
Yes, another fix
Okay.
Another fix was the unions want the personal contact information of
Yeah.
anyone in a union shop, and they want that contact information updated 4 times a year, but no one else can have that information. No other independent organizations. That's now law in California. And they came up with all sorts of other fixes to trap people. So those sorts of things are being used now to trap people in unions. And I think the biggest reason unions haven't felt the pain that they should yet is the bullying. They terrorize people, especially teachers. If you opt out, if you dare to take an independent stance and say, I don't want to fund this, I don't want your representation, no thank you, they bully you so harshly and they isolate you from your colleagues. So you feel trapped. You feel like you have to stay in the union. Most teachers just want to teach.
So it's coercion.
Total coercion. And that's what we fought against. So we have won, but I always tell people, winning the lawsuit was just the first domino. We have so much more work to do. We need to...
What are the plans here?
Well, my plan is, so that's why I wrote this book.
Okay.
So the book is full of testimony, all true stories of teachers totally abused by the unions. I also expose the radical sex ed agenda that's in our schools now that I probably can't even say on airwaves, but they're basically teaching 11-year-olds about oral to anal sex and those sorts of things. That's just a little piece. And the teachers' unions are behind it all. Teachers don't know that. They don't know they're funding that sort of stuff. There's also these horrible discipline policies now. We're not allowed to discipline kids anymore. Teachers literally have PTSD because our classrooms are war zones. Teachers don't know they're funding that through their union dues. So this book is to expose what's really going on in unions, to educate. And what I ask non-teachers is, I have a program called Adopt a Teacher. Adopt every teacher you know. I don't care what their politics, if they're kind people, adopt them. Give them this book. Share your book with them. Have them read it. Once they read it, they will leave the union.
I have a question for you, and this is coming from a personal standpoint. You were a teacher. Okay, you were in the union, I suppose, at one time because you had to be in the union.
That's right.
What has been the reaction to you standing up to the Goliath?
The reaction of loving teachers or the reaction of the unions?
Both. I mean, you got it coming and going both ways, I'm sure.
Right. Okay, so loving teachers.
Okay.
Throughout the lawsuit and today. Take me into a dark room. Are there any cameras in here? Is anyone listening? Rebecca, thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm praying for you. I'm behind you 100%. My husband, a professor, he was the director of the School of Music and Dance at San Diego State University. He just retired.
Right.
There he was teaching. I'm bringing this case. He would post to Facebook because I would say, honey, could you post my editorial? And he'd go, boy, everybody's going to kill me for that. So he'd post it saying something like, I'm proud of my wife. She stands up for what she believes. One by one, faculty members from all over the college would come to him quietly. Dark room again. Anybody listening? I'm behind your wife 100%. Tell your wife I'm cheering for her. Tell your wife I'm praying for her. Okay, teachers and professors are underground if they have any type of conservative values or if they're against what the unions are doing. They're terrified. So they were quietly cheering us on. The unions. Well, the president of the California Teachers Association, during a statewide meetings that I was funding with my forced dues, called myself and my fellow plaintiffs the spawn of Satan. Multiple times. We have it on audio. Spawn of Satan. They also called us the pawn of the Koch brothers, the whore of the Koch brothers, the pawn of the wealthy 1%, anti-teacher, anti-child, anti-public school, you name it. Whatever angry, ugly, divisive term is out there, the teachers' unions are the ones writing those talking points for the far left. If you've been called a bigot, a homophobe, a transphobe, whatever they've called you, teachers' unions are writing those talking points. So they attacked us with all of those names. And my fellow plaintiffs and I, 10 teachers, 10 loving California teachers who every day give their heart, pull out money from their own pockets to help their students, do all kinds of loving things for kids.
Right.
We held our heads high. And we said, we know we're doing what's right for the kids. We are here to serve the kids and their parents and the taxpayers who are funding our pay every day. By the way, funding the dues we're forced to give to these corrupt unions. Some people think, well, I thought unions were good. They were at the beginning, but they've become what they used to fight. They're not just unions, they're corrupt unions. And so that's what we fought against.
Wow. Where can folks find more information about you in the book?
Well, they can find me at forkidsandcountry.org, F-O-R, kidsandcountry.org. That's our website. We started a nonprofit called For Kids and Country. We'd love to have their help in any way. Follow us on social media. They can find all that information on our website. And the book's also on the website, but it's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I read it, so they can get it in Audible. Or they can buy audiobook or get it in Audible with my voice. Kindle, Nook, it's all over the place.
Fantastic.
In all sorts of forms.
Best of luck with everything you're doing, and love to speak with you further down the road and find out more information about what's happening with the unions. Check this out, really information, folks. Thank you so much,
Thank
Rebecca.
you.
And we'll be right back. And Dave Sussman back with you at America's Voice News, and I'm delighted to be here at American Freedom Alliance, and we have Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk, first of all, congratulations on the new podcast.
Thank you so much, The Charlie Kirk Show. So if you love freedom, and you hate socialism, and you want to do one thing today to help freedom, you can go to Apple Podcasts, type in Charlie Kirk Show, subscribe, give it 5 stars. The left, they're already trying to downvote it. They're all trying to give it 1 vote. So don't let them destroy our podcast. Right? No, seriously, they're posting about it in forums. They're trying to get it delisted.
All right, so we need some ratio here, folks.
Right? So if you're watching this, we need your help getting the ratio back. No, seriously, because they're like, this guy spews hate. The same type of thing they did to all these other people with the deplatforming like you wouldn't believe. So if you're watching it, you'd like to help, we'd really appreciate it.
That's a good segue for my first question for you. First of all, how are you not deplatformed today when we see so many other people on the right that are not in any way being abrasive, they're not insulting people? What are we seeing right now?
I'm thankful that I'm not. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And it could be me, it could be you, it could be any one of us next.
Absolutely.
Right? And there's some of these people that are deplatformed, like Louis Farrakhan, who I find detestable, but I think he should still be allowed to be on a platform.
Right.
Right? And there's some people that were deplatformed that I don't find detestable, that I actually agree with on a lot of different things. But here's the big point, is that I believe that these tech companies are one of the biggest threats to our freedoms and liberties today. They have got such a market share on the consumption of information. They're no different than a public utility. It's almost as if you're in rural America, there's only one electricity provider. If you're trying to get to a specific audience, there's only one tech company to be able to get to that audience, or 2, or maybe 3, right? It's Google and Facebook, Instagram, and then maybe Twitter. But basically, if Google turns off the lights on you, if Google says you're done, and then Facebook does the same, you lose a huge piece of the market share. And then if Apple decides to delist you from the podcast space, or if Apple says you can't be on Apple News anymore, they can actually silence and socially engineer people based on their political viewpoint.
There's no doubt that social media is the new town square. There's a discussion, and it's happening right now. We saw it from the folks, the guys that just bought Human Events. They're talking about Yes, and Will Chamberlain talked about the whole idea here of this being a civil rights issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we starting to kind of conflate a little bit here?
Well, so look, I will say this. I've heard lawyers that I really respect on both sides make really substantive arguments. So Dennis Prager is on the side that this is a free speech issue, that you should not be able to delist or you should not be able to silence people. That's why Prager University sued Google.
Right.
With Dennis Prager. I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it as, this is really wrong what they're doing, but this is only a problem because they're monopolies. Think about that.
Right.
It's not, if they had 10 customers and they were doing this, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. It's a problem because they're a monopoly, and they are. So for example, if ExxonMobil owned 85% of the oil in this country, or the oil distribution or oil refinery, however you want to splice it, there'd be riots in the streets, there'd be hearings in Congress, and they'd be broken up immediately. Remember when Microsoft in the 1990s?
The antitrust.
That's exactly right. Google has 85% of search results in this country. Search results are the ways people find direction, identity, and information. And yet they have 85% of that consumption. That's a monopoly. Now, I'm a free market guy, but I'm also someone who believes in the rule of law, the equal application of the rule of law.
Right.
And so if ExxonMobil has one way that they're enforced, and Microsoft has another way they're enforced, and Google somehow gets by, but with 85% of all search results, I don't think so. They are a monopoly, and they should be treated like a monopoly. Same with Amazon, and same as Facebook.
So what does that look like to you? Because if we start talking about breaking up companies, okay, first of all, you are using the force of government to do so. And as a conservative, I know a lot of people have a problem with that.
I'm very reluctant to do that. Very. I'm not quick to this conclusion at all. But there is a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act on the books that was used as trust busting in the early 1900s. Very thoughtful people now have written that maybe that was an overreaction, maybe it wasn't. Okay, I come somewhere in the middle, talking about back in the Rockefeller days. But I will say this, that from an equal application of the law standpoint, if certain companies are regulated on the Sherman Antitrust Act and Google is not, the only reason is because Google spends billions of dollars on lobbying every single year. It might not be billions, but it's something absurd, right? People that have done studies on it.
Right.
But they spent tons of money on public affairs and winning over people's, hearts and minds. So that's really where I come down here. But let me be very clear. I wish there was another way except getting the FTC involved, the Federal Trade Commission. I wish there was another way except enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act. And until someone can show me that a bottom-up, seed-funded competitor can really go up against Facebook, well, then I might reconsider.
You're talking about trillion-dollar organizations here.
Exactly
How
right.
does a free market even approach that?
Well, and there's a lot of other, exactly right.
We've got small platforms that are out there. In a million years, how many of them could actually get to that level?
Sure, yes, exactly. And we're dealing with something we've never dealt with before. So one of the big mistakes that anyone makes in arguing is trying to make a 2019 issue a 1919 issue. So they did not have FaceTime back in 1919. They did not have consumption of information they have today. They did not have the capacity to be able to search something in 2 seconds or less. Now, why does that matter? Well, because then you can have a group of leftist zealots. They'll say, you know what? I want people to think negatively of Donald Trump for the next 10 months. Who's going to stop them? Seriously, who's going to stop them from saying, people in rural Ohio are not going to be able to find their polling places? Who's going to stop them from being able to say, we're going to make sure the Democrat candidate looks 10 times better than the Republican candidate? Who's going to stop them? The answer is nothing. And Tucker Carlson makes this argument, and at first I did not agree with it. I don't know if I fully do. I agree with parts of it, where he says the tech companies are more powerful than the government. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of that, because tech companies don't have the capacity to audit. They don't have the capacity to shut they do have the capacity to shut somebody up. Because then I stop myself. They absolutely do. Remember when we had this big uproar when the IRS used their capacity to shut up conservative groups? Is that not what the tech companies are doing right now?
Right.
Is that not the exact same thing? They are acting as pseudo city-state governments. And people say, well, you could decide not to use them. Really? You could tell me that you can go and live a functional life as a commentator and get your ideas out in the marketplace without using YouTube. Really, show me how that works. Or without Facebook, or without Google. Google is YouTube, or without Twitter. Show me how you're going to get your message out. Show me your business plan. The answer is you can't.
Right.
And then, of course, on top of that is Amazon. If Amazon decides to delist you, you can't sell your books on Amazon. If Twitter decides to delist you, which, okay, Twitter's the smaller piece of all this, there's still a big piece. They banned James Woods, at least temporarily. He might be back by the time this goes back on. So what you have here is actual collusion. It's a huge word, collusion. You have 5 or 6 tech companies that control 90% of the mind space. Cable is evaporating. It's evaporating, meaning the way that people are getting information is not cable, it's not terrestrial radio. It's all in your cell phone. And maybe it's time to break it up. I don't know exactly how that looks like. You mentioned Will Chamberlain. The first thing that I propose, and I think this was Will's idea, was, at least from something I read, is that if they're really going to engage in this viewpoint discrimination, they should not get federal contracts anymore. Do not allow these tech companies to be able to get federal contracts anymore. For example, Amazon. Amazon has engaged in this sort of delisting for years, and they've gotten away from it. For years. Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man, owns the Washington Post and has routinely, remember the whole dilemma or controversy over Dinesh D'Souza's book? Do you remember that whole thing where he was downrated and they were pushing other books and all this sort of stuff? People wonder how Bezos' ex-wife became a best-selling author. They pushed his book, her book on Amazon. That's how she became a best-selling author. But you have 5 or 6 tech companies that are definitely more powerful than most governments in the world. And they all are far leftist. And I mean doctrinaire, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar style leftists.
Turning Point USA, you guys are, how many colleges now?
1,400 high school and college campuses.
1,400,
Yes,
okay.
sir. Yeah.
So what are you hearing right now from the Gen Z, I guess it is now, that's in that range, regarding free speech? And because the comments when you see on somebody like a I don't know, Laura Loomer has been banned or Milo has been banned. It's like, well, they shouldn't have said such negative things to begin with.
It's irrelevant.
Okay, what are you hearing right now from the Gen Z regarding the idea of free speech?
I'll be honest with you, and I understand where your question's coming from. There's 200 million different opinions in a generation, right? So I'll try to synthesize some of the main consensus points that I'm hearing. Okay. But generally, those that tend to be more center-right are disgusted by this sort of censorship. But the academia, pop culture, they're teaching this false idea that somehow speech is equated to violence. That somehow if you hear something that offends you, it's the same as being hit over the head. That somehow if you hear something that you might deem offensive, it's the same as physically being put in danger. This is so unbelievably dangerous because it rules in subjectivity. There's a reason why Lady Justice is blind, because every type of rule or regulation should be that just, objectively blind. It should not be, well, I think it's hate speech and I think it's not. There are very specific Supreme Court rulings of what hate speech actually is. And it's really hard to get to that point. It has to be, you have to be directly inciting violence or mobs against a specific person, individual, or community. It's really hard to get to that point. Right. But saying something like, I think Ilhan Omar is really incorrect and should be held accountable for that. Charlie, you're trying to incite violence. No, I'm not. I'm not inciting anyone. I'm saying she's incorrect and should be held accountable. And see, the left is trying to create a culture where words equal violence. And it's even worse than that, because as early as in elementary school, they think that if you hear something you disagree with, you must be offended. If you're offended, that person must be silenced. Therefore, disagreement means silence, and you only have one opinion. And that opinion must be the leftist, doctrinaire opinion that is taught. This is so treacherous for a society. First of all, it creates immature citizens, and it creates a weak society. Those are the two things. When you have immature citizens, they've never heard anything different than their own opinions. That's where you get snowflakes from. That's where you get people that are just so fragile in their capacity to be able to have discourse, or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. The second thing is it creates a weak society, where if there's anything that comes across that is difficult, if there's any sort of adversity, the society's not ready for it. And so what we have here is a mixture of really bad culture, and then the left, they see their opportunity. They are going to go, before 2020, if you think the delisting is over, if you think they're done kicking people off these platforms, you're wrong. You could be next. I could be next.
Well,
I understand this.
If I'm associated with a Philip Joseph Watson, whoever it is, and you come on my show, now you're associated with this person, which means you could be
so
banned.
You know what I call it, and this I've branded. It's called pathogen theory. Somehow, if you touch somebody, you're hold on a second. I'm a different person. I have my own opinions. Just because you have someone on that show, Joe Rogan's a great example of this. Right. They made Joe Rogan take down his video with Alex Jones.
They made him take it down?
Yes, from YouTube. You don't remember this? This happened a couple weeks ago.
Well, he just had him on a couple weeks ago again.
They made him
take
down his video. And I could be wrong. You could fact check me on this, okay? I might have misread an article, but they made him take down a video.
I remember watching it. It was a train wreck for Alex, but it was fascinating.
Whatever, right? But Joe Rogan's a free speech.
They took him. Joe Rogan is left of center.
Joe Rogan's amazing. Joe Rogan's
he's incredible.
He's one of the great American institutions where he's just pure free speech and pure freedom and liberty. I love him. I don't agree with him on a lot of different things, and he says goofy stuff about.
But he's not a conservative in a
but
traditional
the fact
sense.
he had him in his setting substantiates that, is what they say, that's never the way that we've treated news outlets or that we've treated platforms. Again, isn't that a side of immaturity, though? This is what really upsets me. Here's what no one's talking about it. How insulting to people, how insulting to the individual that somehow I can't understand the difference between good ideas and bad ideas, that I need some sort of philosopher kings in Silicon Valley to show me what is correct and incorrect. That somehow I need Silicon Valley to say, oh, no, ye citizens, we're going to show you what's really right here because you can't handle it. No, we can handle it. In fact, we should handle it. There's a lot of people that have been kicked off social media that I don't agree with.
Right.
And I'm not going to get into the specifics. It's not worth it. But that's okay, though. And
but you support Louis Farrakhan's right to have a voice.
I think he's a sick anti-Semite. He's a sick. I mean, I say this is perfectly clear. He's a horrible person. Right. But horrible people should be allowed to have platforms. That if I'm anything but saying that. Now, where is the difference? You say, well, what's the difference? Now, to my knowledge, has Louis Farrakhan incited direct violence against Jews? I don't know that, okay? So if he has, then he should be kicked off, okay? But he said horrible, horrible, horrible things. I know that. I know that for certain. To this right now, at this broadcast, Hamas still has Twitter accounts. Hamas is shooting rockets into Israel right now.
You just were in Israel.
I was
by the
just in
way.
Israel. It was an amazing trip. And
Right.
anyone should get delisted. It's actual Twitter accounts that are condoning the violence against a nation state, right?
Yeah.
That are a proxy terrorist organization in Gaza. They should be delisted.
So
if anyone.
just a real quick question on your Israel trip, because I've been there as well myself.
It's one of the great countries in the world.
And what you see happening in Israel right now isn't being reported in Europe or in
Not
the
at
United
all.
States, and that is that the Arabs that are working in Israel love Israel. They love the fact that they can support their children with an honest living, and they aren't throwing off buildings if they're gay or whatever it may
Yes.
be, where Hamas is obviously suppressing their people,
Totally.
subverting.
Yes.
Okay. So
No one talks
what
about
was
this.
your experience there?
I mean, it's magical. I've been there a couple times now. I'm going again in a couple months. The world's a better place because of Israel. It's undeniable.
Right.
The patents, the medical advancements, the human rights, and so here's the real fundamental question that I'm still waiting for an answer. Why the obsession? Why the obsession with a country of 8 million people that respects human rights, that has a gay pride parade, freedom of commerce, freedom of movement, freedom of speech in the Middle East, when it's a sea of totalitarianism, a sea of tyranny? Everywhere that surrounds Israel is less free. There's not a country that touches Israel that is more free than Israel. Not one country. There's not a country within 200 miles that is more free
Or
than
a country
Israel.
that touches a country.
That's exactly right. So you could extrapolate this throughout the entire region.
Right.
There's 41 Muslim majority countries in the world. I think 34 of them are Arab.
Right.
Why the obsession with the singular Jewish state? The answer is it is anti-Semitism. It is. Pure and simple. And the state of Israel is fundamental to the Jewish religion. It's fundamental. It's mentioned well over 500 times in the Torah. It is instrumental to the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet to this day, where there's the Hall of the Patriarchs, 97% of the city of Hebron is controlled by Arab Muslims. 97%. Here's the only consistency in the history of Israel. The more Israel gives up land, the further from peace they get. The more they give up land, the more they get sneak attacked by Arabs. Oh, let's give up land in 2005 to the Palestinian Authority. That'll help us get a peace plan. What happens? 10,000 Jews get kicked out of their house, out of settlements. Yeah. That's real refugees, by the way. Those are real refugees. Jews that are kicked out of their houses in Gaza. What happens? Hamas takes over Gaza. Gaza was rolling hills, factories, beautiful, prosperous areas. Now you have a terrorist organization, a paramilitary terrorist organization that builds terrorist tunnels into the nation state of Gaza to kill Jews. At the recording of this episode, 800 rockets have now been shot into Israel in the last 48 hours. 4 Israelis are dead. For what? Simply because they're a peaceful Jewish state that exists. And then the Palestinian Authority said, well, we want our own state. Hold on a second. You have your own government. You've proven you can't even function under your own government. You're supposed to have an election every 4 years. You haven't had an election in 12 years. Mahmoud Abbas is a pseudo-dictator of the Palestinian Authority. You know there's hundreds of millions of dollars that flow into Gaza every single year. Where does that money go? It goes so they can have rockets so they can launch it in Israel. It doesn't go to hospitals. It doesn't go to schools. It doesn't go to places of business. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that builds humanitarian centers for wars they're not involved in, for people that wish them harm. For example, in the Syrian civil war in the northeast part of Israel, in the Golan Heights, outside and inside of Israel, they had hospitals for victims of the Syrian civil war. Syria has invaded Israel countless times. Syria has launched rockets in Israel countless times. Yet Israel is so humane that they will build hospitals for people that wish to kill them. Do you think Syria is going to build hospitals for Israel? You think Syria is going to build hospitals for Israelis? The lack of information, and I will debate anyone at any time about Israel, because I've actually been there. I've been to Hebron. I've been to the West Bank. I've gone to the most quote-unquote dangerous parts of Israel, the most dangerous parts of Gaza, and I've seen it firsthand. I understand the complexities of the issue, and some would say I don't really have a dog in this fight because I'm a Christian. I'm an American Christian, so I can look at it objectively. Now people say, well, Charlie, you're a conservative. You can't think. So hold on a second. I want what's best for my country. I want what's best for the world. I want what's best for the sovereignty of the state of Israel. And the amount of anti-Semitism, vitriol, and hatred towards a country with half the world's Jewry and 8 million people that believe in human rights, where all 3 monotheistic religions are represented in their government, is absolutely detestable to me.
You were there right after Bibi was reelected?
No, right before. So I was there.
Before?
I was there 2 days before the Golan Heights decision.
One of the most fascinating things that I saw about that last election that took place is that Bibi's support, the majority of his support, came from 18 to 24-year-olds.
Isn't that great?
So whereas in America you have more leftists in the youth,
there's a great reason for that.
The conservatives are in the youth in Israel. Why?
Because they're forced to serve in the military. Because they're forced to do something when they're young. They have to take responsibility. They have to get up every day and do something of meaning. When our 18-year-olds do the absolute opposite of the lack of responsibility. Now, there's a lot of 18-year-olds that serve in our military. God bless them, the ones that do. But the 18-year-olds that go off to UCLA or UC Santa Barbara, you think they have the same sort of daily responsibility as an IDF soldier that has to walk the streets of Hebron, where any day a guy with a machete could cut his head off? He has to carry a weapon everywhere he goes to make sure he takes care of that weapon. The mentality of always at war. So yes, that makes you vote more responsibly, of course.
They have equity in their
They have to mature a lot quickly. A 20-year-old Israeli is light years ahead of a 20-year-old American. Light years. Because a 20-year-old American has no responsibility. They're told that they're victims for nothing when an Israeli that is enlisted in the army at age 18, they pick up a weapon, they go to their equivalent of a boot camp in the IDF, and then they have to defend their country. That's why they vote so conservatively. And some say, well, Charlie, are you advocating for bringing back a draft? Well, some form of national service I absolutely support. I think if you're 18 in this country, a bill should be supported from 18 to 19 with some exceptions. If you have some amazing talent, you got some crazy scholarship to be a scientist, and obviously you can have responsibility, you should have a year of service. Clean up a national park. Go do, what's the thing that JFK started? Peace Corps. Go do the Peace Corps. Go do something of value where you have
Clinton
to
had the AmeriCorps or
yeah,
something?
By the way, wake up before 7 a.m. for a year. How about you just have to wake up before 7 a.m. And don't do drugs. I'm not even joking because these kids have and there's so many good students out there, and I'm not trying to discount them, and many of them are involved in Turning Point USA. Yeah. But the majority of students, when they enter college, they get away from responsibility. In fact, I make the argument that high school kids are forced to be more responsible than college kids. The classes are tougher, the schedule is more difficult, you have to wake up earlier, and the rigor is more intense. It's like college is a vacation from the maturity that they accomplished in high school. Think about that.
Right.
My high school was way hard. It was one of the hardest things I did. I was up at 5:30 every day. I was going to weightlifting. I was going to track practice and football, school all day long. And then I was home at 7 p.m. and then homework till 1 a.m. and I just collapsed.
Right.
You know, that was one of the hardest I ever had to push myself. And I think a lot of people would agree with that.
Last question for you, because I
I
know
talk
you're
all
about
day
to
long.
speak. I know, and I would love to have you back on to talk long form. Okay, you're speaking today here at AFA, and this is about the obviously the leftists that have gone through the institutions. Going back to Turning Point USA, you're seeing in the schools right now. Obviously, people that are coming to your events are supporters, okay, most of them anyway,
yeah.
All right. What do you see as far as the trajectory for Gen X going into corporations, into our media, into pop culture, into sports? What are we looking at in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
So, look, I'm going to say this in my speech, this is kind of I shouldn't say that, but my refocused piece of what I'm talking about, which is there's about 4 or 5 ways to shape culture really quick. Family is the most timeless institution. Left has destroyed that. Community and churches, the left has destroyed that. And then consumption of information, which is media, and pop culture, which is Hollywood, the left has taken over and destroyed that. But the basis of all of that, what's the one tributary, the one thing that flows into all those different, it's college, it's academia. Where more people get values and perspectives and worldview now from college campuses and high schools than even their family. And we have sacrificed the terrain on college campuses. We're taking it back. We are taking it back on one of the most focused campaigns, ideological and cultural campaigns, I think, in American history. One that is so important, that's going to have impacts all throughout our culture, because for far too long, we have allowed the radical left to dictate the terms of engagement on college campuses. You don't get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out of nowhere. You get her because of college campuses that have been just totally abandoned. We've abandoned it to the left. You don't get Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar, believe it or not, is not a byproduct of anything else except higher education. She is word for word doctrine, what they teach in the lecture halls. She is word for word dogma, what they teach in our universities. And what we are doing is a concerted effort to win back our universities and bring back these marketplace of ideas. All we want is a fair shot at the game. All we want is for every student to be able to say, maybe they'll say this, I'm a liberal at graduation. Okay, make the conservative argument for me, and they can do it. I might not agree with it. I want them to be able to make the conservative argument and then disagree with it. I've rarely found anyone that can make my argument for me and then ends up disagreeing with me.
They're pulling the hook. You're going on stage. Charlie Kirk,
Here we
Turning
are.
Point USA. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.